potentially there is room for compromise there by the end of next week?
Well, first of all, I haven't heard that compromise Pete Sessions talks about. I don't think those funds are sufficient to do what Hal Rogers says they need, the Republican chairman of the Appropriations Committee. What we need to do, in my view, however, is meet the immediate challenge of processing these folks who have come across the border, many of whom are children, treat them in a humane way and consistent with law. Secondly, what we need to do is then determine exactly what the status of legislation is, have hearings, and consider in a way that will give time to reflect on what ought to be done. Now, we could immediately, of course, come to what is a bipartisan agreement from the Senate and bipartisan agreement, frankly, in the House on border security in a comprehensive immigration reform bill, which is exactly what we ought to do. And which the Republicans have refused to do,
but in
notwithstanding a majority of the American people.
It seems, though, like the conversation is almost, in a way, devolved from, for the last year, it's been about comprehensive immigration reform. It's passed the Senate. Can it pass the House? We've had that whole drama. But now we're dealing with this specific crisis on the border and the looming deadline of Congress going on its August recess, and that coming up very quickly. How optimistic are you, though, that something will be agreed to before that August recess, specifically to address the border crisis right now?
I think if the Republicans allow themselves to deal with the immediate challenge, and that is to fund the resources necessary to deal with the challenge and not get mired in an ideological debate or substantive debate on which there have been no hearings and no ability to reflect, then I think we'll do it. My understanding is, though, today they're going to say there's a possibility of doing it. Why? Because, as usual, the Republican Party is a deeply divided party. I think we could get votes for a response to the immediate challenge that the administration has requested. Now, there may be a difference on the number. Frankly, I think under $1 billion is clearly insufficient funds to do the job that is required to do, not ideologically, not by Democrats or Republicans, simply by the requirements of the law.
The other item in the news today is the administration apparently now is considering essentially setting up shop in Honduras with the idea of processing potential applicants for refugee status, children in Honduras, and making a determination there of are they eligible for asylum, are they eligible for refugee status in the United States, saying they would potentially over the next few years bring in like 1,750, I think was the estimate, who could maybe come to the United States. Is that something you support, that concept?
I think that certainly makes a lot of sense, so that we don't have people coming across a long stretch of desert and dangerous area, subjecting themselves to being abused in the process.
Do you think we'd be flooded if we made it that easy? Hey, you know, you can go downtown, you can go and hear somebody who's going to take your application. I mean, compared to taking that trek across the desert you're talking about, wouldn't that?
As opposed to having them in our country and processing them here, which will take a long time as well, I think it's preferable to say at the beginning, after all, Vice President Biden has been down there, the President's made it very clear, Mr. Gutierrez made it very clear this morning, who's been a big advocate of immigration reform and of the immigration community. Don't come, because you won't necessarily be able to stay.
Have they
so
gotten...
Do you understand what I'm saying? It's better to say no there than to say no here. It's more efficient, more effective, and it will preclude additional danger to young people.
Well, I take that point, and it gets to one of the criticisms I think Republicans have leveled at the administration on this, which is to say, they've been critics of the deferred action program for 2 years since the president implemented that. But one of the criticisms or one of the suggestions has been that whatever side you're on that, whether you think that was a good thing or a bad thing, did it have the effect, the unintended effect of telling people, of telling minors in these Central American countries that, you know, it's sort of a mixed message that if you come to the United States, it's okay to turn yourself over to the border agent because you're going to be given a home here. Did that message get sent because of deferred action, even unintentionally?
No, I don't. The answer is I don't think so. What deferred action said, if you were here before 2007, that would apply if you came as a child and you didn't.
Right. No, I mean, I know that's what it said in the text, but did it have the effect when it sort of, it's like the game of telephone almost, right? It gets.
Well, I could argue that the effect one of the effects was when the Republicans said, no, we're not going to do immigration reform. Yes, we think the system is broken. So people thinking the system was broken and there would be no avenue have chosen this avenue, which is not the right avenue to go, to simply show up and come across and be processed and many sent back, most sent back in my view. So that I think the right thing to do would be to adopt an immigration reform system that has a system that is working, and that would encourage people to participate in a system that was working, not to avoid a system that was broken.
Something jumped out at me, though, on the way over here today. There's a new poll out that finds that overall, if you survey Americans on this question of impeachment, overwhelmingly they're against it. This is not a mainstream issue. If you survey Republicans, though, 57% of Republicans say they would like President Obama to be impeached. And I consider that finding in light of sort of the lawsuit that Republicans, that Speaker Boehner is pursuing right now against the president. And I just wonder, do you think this is heading to a point where Republicans are going to impeach? They're going to feel the pressure from their base to impeach this president?
If they do, they will lose. The American public will think that is a totally political, bad policy to pursue, and further reflection of the political nature of the Republican Party, and of a Republican Party that is focused solely on politics, not on the welfare of the country at large. They impeached President Clinton. That seems to be a modus operandi at some point in time to move forward on an impeachment process on a Democratic president. The American people didn't think that was a good idea then. They don't think it's a good idea now. A suit against the president, which is now going to be on the calendar in just the few short days that we have left. They're going to take up time about suing the president, which their own witnesses say is problematic at very best. They're wasting time on politics and confrontation. And while 57% of Republicans may think that's a good idea, 70 to 80% of the American people think it's a lousy idea.
You've been in this building for a while. John Boehner's been in this building for a while. You've seen him before there was a Tea Party, before there was a President Obama. So you know him, I think, better than most people do. There's a perception of him that the real John Boehner is somebody the public hasn't seen, that he's scared of his conference, he's scared of the Republican conference revolting against him, he's doing the Tea Party's bidding, but the real John Boehner would like to do other things legislatively. Is that your read on him?
Well, I don't know about the real John Boehner. John and I have had the opportunity, the Speaker and I have had the opportunity to work together in times past. After all, this John Boehner was the one who, when George Bush proposed No Child Left Behind, worked with George Miller from California and Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts, Senator Kennedy.
You don't say that too loud around here. The Tea Party might revolt against him, right?
It was a time when we got things done, when we did work together. John Boehner was the chairman of the committee. Republicans were in charge. But they had, frankly, a large number of Republicans who were focused on productive work in the United States, as opposed to opposition for opposition's sake, as opposed to those who simply believe government is bad and therefore anything we allow it to do will be negative in its effect. The American public don't believe that. They understand that government has to be a positive effect. Not that government's perfect, not that they like everything it does, but they know that they need to have a government that is working well if their country is going to succeed.
We've seen such a difference between, since President Obama came to office, those first 2 years and the flurry of legislative activity that was happening here, healthcare reform, stimulus, all of that. And then basically the minute the Republicans took over and we had a split government, everything just sort of stopped. When you look back at the first 2 years, the big majorities you guys had in the House and the Senate, the White House, all that momentum, what is one thing you look back at and say, I wish, knowing what's happened in the 4 years since, we had done when we had those majorities?
Well, I think we had a very productive Congress, very frankly. I think the Affordable Care Act, which I think is going to prove to be a landmark piece of legislation, which is going to facilitate millions and millions of Americans accessing affordable quality
Sure,
health
no,
care.
and absolutely, the most productive Congress is the Great Society, but is there something you look at now saying, wow, knowing the gridlock we faced after that, I wish we had made this a priority?
Well, one of the things I think I wish we had done, and you asked me to reflect back, is I wish in the Recovery Act and Reinvestment Act that we had taken a very large sum of money and not spent it, frankly, in some of the ways we did, mainly tax cuts that nobody really knew they got, and invested that in infrastructure. because what I think that would have done, it would have helped build the economy, create jobs, and would still be a force for job creation today. That would, if you ask me one thing that I would have done differently, that would have been one of them. But I will tell you this, that we turned around an economy that could have gone into a depression, and it didn't go into a depression. And we did that after a Republican-led Congress rejected President Bush's proposal to staunch the economic decline that was occurring. So that I think that we did some tough things. We did some things that were not understood very well. And I think that, frankly, our Republican colleagues failed to work with us in any way, unlike stark difference than the Democratic Congress responding to a Republican president who said the country is in crisis, we need to respond. Two-thirds of the Democrats responded supporting George Bush's policy, and in my opinion kept us out of a depression and got us started back up to recovery.
Well, that gets me to the one other thing I wanted to ask you about, and that's sort of like the long-term political reward potentially for Democrats, whether it's from health care, whether it's from if the economy continues to rebound and people feel that more. People look at the 2014 elections and they look at history, and the White House party gaining seats in the midterm. It's tough no matter what. To gain the number you need almost seems prohibitive, but I wonder, do you look at this as sort of a longer game, that 2014 is about surviving, doing better than expected? In 2016, maybe the climate's different, maybe Hillary Clinton's leading the ticket. Is that really the target for Democrats in terms of getting the House back?
Let me tell you, Steve, we're going to survive. I have no worry about that. And I frankly think we're going to do better, as you point out, than expected. And I think we can take back the House.
In 2014?
In 2014, two reasons. One, we have some extraordinarily good candidates around the country. Or more than two reasons. Secondly, we're outraising the Republicans. So even though we're the minority party, we're outraising in terms of received than our Republican counterparts in the Republican campaign committee by a pretty good amount, and we have almost $9 million more on hand than the Republicans have. Now, that's in the scheme of the independent expenditures, that may not seem like a lot, but that's real money that can be spent on hard accomplishments in terms of TV and ground game. So that's going to be important. Good candidates, raising money, and thirdly, very frankly, my experience over the last 3 or 4 years has been that Republicans have a penchant for self-destruction. They have a penchant for doing things the American public shake their head and say, why are they doing that? They shut down the government. Now, it wasn't a mistake. It was a policy of shutting down the government. The American public thought that was dumb. Furthermore, if you go by issue, comprehensive immigration reform, minimum wage, jobs legislation, violence against women, and just go through a litany of issues, 65 to 70% of the American people agree with the Democratic position. So you put good candidates, good message, and resources together, I think we have an excellent opportunity. Now, you say historically, which I think you're correct on that. Historically, if you look at the stretch of history, the sixth year of a president is not a great year for the incumbent party. But, frankly, in 1998, we picked up seats in the sixth year.
You need 17. You got 5, and you were rejoicing, right?
Well, if we picked up 5, and I think we're going to pick up significantly more than 5, I think that would be doing better than many people expect.
Absolutely.
Which is what your hypothesis was.
Right.
We're going to do better than people expect.
So I got one more question.
Okay.
I'm going to demand an answer on this one. There's a report
Haven't you
today.
Been demanding answers
well, this is what I'm really going to hold your feet to the fire.
I could have avoided answers on the other.
I say that information until the end of the interview on purpose. But there was a report today that it looks like Democrats for their 2016 convention may be close to narrowing or Philadelphia. Also in the running, Phoenix, Birmingham, Columbus, Ohio. So 5 cities there. Your party's next national convention. Where do you want to go in 2 years?
You may demand an answer. I'm not going to give you one. I would love to go to a nice, quiet place.
So you're saying no Brooklyn then?
No, Brooklyn. I was born in New York City, so I'm a fan of the city. Brooklyn's a vibrant, growing place. It's not your grandfather's Brooklyn, as they would say. So it would be a vibrant place to have a convention. The other cities as well each send a message. but I think that the DNC will make that determination. What is important is not so much where we are as what we say. Not so much where we are, but who we nominate. Not so much where we are, but the vision that we present to the American people.
I'm going to put you down for Philadelphia.